Just
Good afternoon, everybody. It's just touched 4 o'clock. It's Stephen Lisa Stone from Ray White and Parnell here, and we're really happy this afternoon to have you join us for our webinar with Tony Alexander.
Yeah, and Tony doesn't need, I'm sure, doesn't need any introduction. Tony was chief economist for the BNZ for 25 years, which is an enormous career. He is now out doing his own thing, and we're very fortunate to have him along today. So we were going to say, first of all, what we've seen, Tony, in the market here at the moment is that there's a lot of, I mean, obviously we're going to talk about property, so get that out first. There's been a lot of buyer activity in the market. We're getting lots of inquiry every day on all of the properties that we've got that came along before the lockdown happened. So yeah. So I guess the question is.
So I guess we're seeing lots of activity from buyers' perspective. I mean, where do you see the market sitting at the moment?
And how do you even figure out how it's going to be, either short term or long term, when we've really not kind of experienced this kind of thing before, have we?
Yeah. Well, I think that's the thing. This is a unique situation where we've had many recessions in New Zealand before, about 6 since the 1970s. Each of them has been different, and this one is absolutely unique in that we have all of a sudden a stopping of economic activity. Usually it's something like inflation's a problem, so interest rates go up to 11% on floating mortgage rates. The currency goes through the roof, or oil prices soar, or all these sort of things. And when these things happen, the impact on the economy tends to take a lot of time to come through, and especially the labour market reaction happens with a lag. So in other words, firms see their sales go down, but they don't know if it's permanent or temporary. So you hold on to your staff, you hold on, and then eventually you go, nah, this isn't changing in the next 6 months. And then they lay people off with a lag. Not this time around. Now we can see there is no longer any international travel sector in New Zealand. So no point keeping any staff on. The hospitality sector has been hit straight away. And we're learning even with a level 3, when that appears hopefully next week, the bars, the cafes, the restaurants, they're still not going to be open. And even when they are, there's probably at level 2 and level 1 still going to be some sort of social distancing rules or invitations to separate. So what's happening is that you're getting a lot of unemployment and weakness in the economy all of a sudden. And we haven't seen this before, so we've got to be careful about making any strong statements about what is going to happen. And I guess where I've focused on for the housing market is that whenever you have a downturn, a shock, or suddenly interest rates are high, or something like that, in the short term, I guess the psychology dominates. Of people are confused, don't know what's happening. They start to look at more negative commentary that's in the newspapers. The people who got it wrong about the housing market falling in the GFC 40% or 30, 20, 10, they kept waiting and waiting, and it didn't happen. Some of those people are out there again, but not all that many. And in the short term, we can see people make, I guess, some panic decisions. As with KiwiSaver 3 to 4 weeks ago, people went from aggressive to conservative funds and successfully locked in their losses. And what I've also, I guess, seen for housing markets is that you can get a lot of confusion, in the short term, but there's a lot of people like ourselves who've been around over a number of cycles. And what we know is that in the end, the long-term fundamentals always show through. And those longer term fundamentals, I'd suggest, are what are occupying the minds of many of the buyers we see out there at the moment. We know many, if not most, of the first home buyers, they've never seen a recession while they've been working. They've never seen a proper housing market downturn, so they're scared off. But a lot of the other people out there, we've seen markets go down before, they come back up. A lot of these people are professional investors, they're well capitalized, and they've already been on the phones to people like yourselves saying, can you keep an eye out for something for me? Because I've always wanted to shift into Parnell. There's a particular type of house I'm looking for, or always been looking for a decent investment in, God knows, New Lynn or Christchurch or something. And I think some of those people are going to be dominating the market over the next few months. But people do have to realize that a lot of people will still lose their jobs. A lot of businesses are going to close down. There's just going to be too much cash flow deficiency to handle. And I guess just keep in mind that although I've sort of focused on very long term versus short term, once people come off 6-month mortgage deferral, some of them then may make a decision to sell their house. Later on, maybe I'll talk about some of those long term factors, but I think that accounts for some of the buying interest at the moment. It's the long term people and those who are well capitalized.
Mm. And so do you think this that we're going through now will have, well, you probably kind of half asked it, but answered it, sorry. But do you think it will have an effect long term? Are there going to be any, can you see any fundamental changes from this 1 to 3 month period, whatever, that are going to have an impact in another 2 years, 3 years?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, because we're all looking around ourselves that this is unusual and, oh, I like working from home. I'm never going back into an office again. So we're running scenarios where people aren't in the CBD, the place empties out. We're thinking people like working from home, so maybe they need a better, bigger house to have a better, bigger home office and more separation between that office and other parts of the house, for instance. So we shouldn't always be thinking people are going to be downsizing. Some people may decide family is most important, so we're all going to move out to the regions. We're all going to live in Ekatahuna and Otorohanga and these sort of places. We over extrapolate. I've seen this so many times. A thing happens, there's something which logically fits the narrative. Some people will move out to a smaller town, but we overemphasize it. And that can lead to some bad decision making. And again, so I just focus on the long term, and I really don't think the long term fundamentals have changed, certainly not against housing. If anything, they've moved in favour. And what I would say there would be, number one, there's a whole generation of young people now understand why the baby boomers moved into property after the 1987 share market crash, because no one has just woken up recently and gone, oh my goodness, the value of my investment properties has just gone down by 30%. As happened with their equity investments, the share markets, for instance. So that's the first thing I'd put in long term. Secondly, the level of interest rates fallen even further. These rates are going to stay low for years and absolutely years. At least the next 3 years seems to be the target from our central bank in Australia in particular. But the lesson of the global financial crisis is that in countries where money is printed, the money doesn't tend to get borrowed. It doesn't tend to get spent. It doesn't drive hyperinflation or inflation. It tends to leave a lot of businesses in operation which maybe would not otherwise have been around. They make their widgets, the price of widgets stays low, inflation and interest rates stay low. Money printing, perversely, keeps interest rates low over the longer term. So I look at that. I also look at the fact that I think the management of the COVID-19 event here in New Zealand is far superior to 95, 99% of other countries out there. And I can't help but think that there's going to be a few foreigners looking at New Zealand and going, that's where I'd like to be long term. But I'd say maybe more especially, there's 1 million Kiwis overseas with their partners and maybe their children. And I can't help but think more and more of them over the next couple of years are going to think, I think that's where I'd like to go back. I'm going to come back to New Zealand, set up a business. I'll probably earn less money if I get a wage or a salary, but it's time to come back for the lifestyle. So for the moment, there's an interruption to the net migration flows. Foreigners can't come in, so end of story. And also for the next 12 to 18 months, a quarter, maybe a third of the 200,000 people in New Zealand on working visas, the working migrants, they will leave as well. But over the longer term, I actually think our population growth will be enhanced by this event rather than retarded by it. So my long-term outlook for the housing market is slightly better. Oh, and one final one, construction. We've seen nationwide 38,000 consents issued in the past year for houses to be built, apartments, etc. That's up from 13,500 in 2011, so strong growth. Well, of course, what we're going to see is banks pulling back from financing property developers in particular. Again, they did it after the 87 crash. They did it after the GFC. They did it 2 to 3 years ago. In fact, 3 years ago. They're going to do it again. And I guess one of the most interesting areas of activity for the next few months will be some developers and spec builders are going to have to sell whatever the heck they've got as quickly as humanly possible. And maybe that's where some of the bargains could come along on one of us purchasing a partially completed complex or house in the near future. But it just says to me, the growth in the supply of housing, it's going to be interrupted for the next 12 months by this event. And that will accentuate the shortages in the cities, not in the regions, but in the cities.
Yeah. So, and one question that we've had is that, do you think that there's a particular buyer group that's going to take it or be able to take advantage of it, like first home buyers, or is it more the people that are already, home owners or investors? I mean, is there a group that's going to be able to take advantage more than others?
Yeah, it depends what we're talking about. So let's see, those people who are well capitalized, they will, I guess many of them are just going to take their time, and they will, in the next maybe 9 months to 12 months, be able to make their long-term planned purchase in Queenstown or Wanaka, aspirational locations, or the coastal property, the batch or something like that. Because what happens every downturn is the small to medium-sized business owner, the SME owner, will have to sell some assets in order to raise cash. And so they sell the holiday homes, the coastal properties, Wanaka, Queenstown, or whatever. And that leaves space for the, I'm guessing, an older age group, well capitalized, even if they've got a mortgage, it's a low one, to be able to make that aspirational purchase. Some opportunities will come up in that regard. For the first home buyers, also, I think there's two other groups of opportunities that come up here. One is what I was just mentioning in terms of maybe it's townhouse complexes, especially in Auckland. 80% of the city can now be subdivided under the unitary plan. A lot of smaller people have done some subdivisions, maybe building a block of 8 or 10 townhouses, and maybe they need to satisfy bank covenants by accelerating their sales as fast as humanly possible. If I were a first home buyer in Auckland at the moment, I'd be looking around in the next few months for some of those complexes looking to discount the sales of their final, 25%, 50% of the units. Yeah. Other than that, inner city Auckland, inner city, it's going to be bereft of all those foreign tourists occupying the Airbnb. It's going to be empty of most of the foreign students as well. And so I definitely think we're going to get some price adjustments in the inner city Auckland apartment market. And that would be a really good place for, I think, first home buyers to get their foot on the ladder. The challenge, however, will be the deposits and the bank willingness to lend there. The banks will wait until the prices go down. I know of one bank which has already increased minimum investor deposit side for Auckland inner city from 30% to 45%. And I'm assuming they've done a similar sort of increase from 20% to something else for first home buyers, but that's where I'd look. Also, there's another opportunity for a different group of buyers, and that would be, let's say, older Aucklanders who are planning to retire to the regions, go back to where they came from, Wanganui or something like that. What I started saying 4 years ago now, was that Auckland had peaked. It'd be boring for the next 3 to 4 years. If you're looking for excitement, go to the regions. And we've seen big price gains. But I also warned people overinvest in the regions. They always overestimate how many people will leave Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, and go to Wanganui and even Palmerston North and places like that. And I was speaking with somebody online this morning, and they were noting that the number of pages of advertisements for properties in Wanganui, it had blown out to 16 pages in whatever document that they were referring to. So we've seen a lot of investors get over optimistic out in the regions. They'll be looking to pull back towards the main cities. And that also will provide some opportunities for some people looking to leave the big city and retire and free up cash in the regions. So that's another group of buyers who can face some good conditions. So, my emphasis very much out there is most people are not going to be negatively affected by the shock, by this recession. Most people will not be after they've experienced, 20% pay cut for 3 or 6 months or something. Most people are not going to be in a bad situation. We have to obviously feel sympathy for those who unfortunately are going to be put back a bit by this, but plenty of opportunities will open up.
Yeah, that's cool. And so, we've got another question about the OCR, saying that the OCR is at a record low. And there's not much room for the Reserve Bank to go. If they do go to 0% or -%, how does that work for borrowers and depositors?
Yeah, if they were to do that, you won't see negative term deposit rates, even overseas where we've had the negative rates. That doesn't happen. Banks need to have a high level of term deposits, especially for longer than 90 days. And so even at the moment, although we've seen most other interest rates go down, the term deposit rates haven't come down much at all. There's actually a disconnect between the level of term deposit rates and wholesale interest rates at the moment. Bank margins have in fact been squeezed quite a bit by events currently. And the lending rates, no, they're not going to go negative. They will go down a little bit, but frankly, if they go from 0.25% OCR to 0 minus 0.5, which I don't expect, it really wouldn't make any difference. I mean, holy cow, if you're already getting a fixed interest rate at 3.3 or 309%, what's it going to take? honestly. The interest rates are already really low, and the evidence overseas is that the negative interest rates have not successfully driven inflation up, which is the target they had overseas. And the Reserve Bank has basically said, not that they don't want to go there, but that they're not going to change the 0.25% for 1 year, so 11 months left in that, basically. They're just not going to change it.
And what are your feelings on, because we haven't really talked about interest rates, like the future of them so far. I mean, where do you think the pressure's going to be? And what would you be doing if you had a mortgage rolling over at the moment?
Yeah, okay. The interest rates are going to stay low for years.
Yeah,
I'm saying this, even 3, 4, 6, 9 months ago. And now they've gone to a low level. It's going to take a long time for the world economy to get back up to speed and produce inflationary pressures. So, I'm looking at multi-years. I've said, 3 years of pretty much where we are at the moment. And I think even beyond that, the speed of increase is going to be really, really low, because by the time you get 3 years out, most people with a mortgage, they'll have taken out that mortgage at a low interest rate like this. And whenever the Reserve Bank does need to slow the economy down, 0.5%, 1% increase is going to scare the bejeebers out of most people, especially youngsters. They've never seen it before. They wouldn't understand when I say, the interest rates used to peak at floating rates of 11% in 1998, 2008. And of course, we had 21% plus back in 1987, 89.
This mortgage was about 19%.
Yep. So if I were borrowing at the moment, if somebody were to offer me a 3-year fixed rate at 3.3 or 3.4%, I think I'd go, what the heck? That's just too good. And I personally would take it, but I'm conservative. Most people, I think, will be quite all right just fixing it the 1 year. It's where the banks are competing, a 1 year out to 18 months. I guess I'd fix the year if I wanted to improve my cash flow. And I guess that's a comment I've been making when I've been giving these sort of webinars more to SME audiences. Cash flow is king. So don't be afraid to take a mortgage deferral on your house, to take the business finance guarantee scheme, get some of that cash, the tax thing they announced this morning or yesterday morning as well, to free up your cash flow going forward. And it's going to take a while for a lot of people in the SME sector to figure out what the future looks like and what the safety of their cash flow is going to be. So those sort of people occupied with their businesses, they're probably not going to have too much of a presence in the housing market in the next wee while. A lot of those small are going to be pretty busy the next 6 to 9 months, just restructuring their businesses, getting on a more solid footing and getting ready for improved conditions over 2021 and especially 2022.
Yeah.
Any other questions have come through there? I've got time.
Yeah, there's another one that come through. This has come from a finance guy, Andrew. So it seems property prices are highly correlated to credit growth. Do you agree with this? Where do you see credit growth and availability of credit heading over the next 12 months?
Okay, actually not as high a correlation as you would think. I've got 2 sets of numbers in my mind, and I'll go through the second set because that's quite relevant across a number of spheres at the moment. In the 5 years leading into the GFC, the total volume of debt for the household sector grew about 85%. Same for businesses, about 85%. In the past 5 years, when prices have obviously increased very strongly, earlier than that in Auckland and over this period in the regions, household debt has only grown about 38%, business debt about 41%. For farming, it's even more different. In the 5 years leading into 2008, farm debt grew 111%, 111. It's been 20% the past few years. And I've highlighted, in fact, that over the period of time, Auckland house prices roughly doubled from 2009 to 2016, or a little bit shorter. Growth in household debt overall in that period was only about 60%. So no, the correlation isn't as much as people would be thinking. And the comments many people used to make that it's speculation and all debt-driven increases in house prices in New Zealand from 2011 or so, not correct, actually. And even the ratio of household debt to household income, it peaked at 158% back in 2008. It's only about 163% now. So it's not been a debt-driven situation. The debt dynamic going forward, however, is important. I'd suggest not so much for the home purchaser, The banks at the moment, they're too busy. Okay, just don't bother your banks with too much complex at the moment. They're busy handling so many inquiries, but eventually things will settle down. The big change in the area of finance availability isn't going to be in the home mortgage sector. It is going to be in the property development and businesses general area, because they're going to write some losses out of this. Their margins have been squeezed. They'll be looking to rebuild their capital bases. They'll be pulling back on the riskier lending. The last time this happened really big was after 87, and the finance companies took over from maybe 1992. You won't see that dynamic this time around. They were largely unregulated before. They've been regulated ever since after the GFC now. So that's just some comments on some of the finance scene is permanently changing again in New Zealand, and businesses are going to have to finance more growth through retained earnings and outside capital as opposed to the bank money.
Cool. Thank you for that. Have you got time for another one?
Yeah, go for it. I got
I know
time. Nowhere to go.
Excellent. So someone's just asked, where do you think the rental market is headed now and in the future?
Yeah, I think that's where the bigger turn is. Not so much on the prices. I think it's more on the rents, and that the upward momentum was very, very strong in rents. And I expressed major concerns, especially about people at the lower end of the socio-economic spectrum, with the upgrading of our housing stock, healthy homes, etc. It was going to price a lot of people out of the market. Well, that situation will improve now, not just because the rents will decline, but because a lot of these, say, the migrant workers will be leaving, and the Airbnb properties coming on the market as well. So I guess I'm pleased about that from a socio-economic, social point of view. But we're seeing rent discounting at the moment. I'm generally seeing landlords doing the right thing, being willing to share part of the pain, part of the burden. I do know some landlords are viewing this as a bit of the last straw, and they will look to sell because with the ring fencing and all other changes, they're just going, yeah, maybe they'll go and put some of their money elsewhere. I think they'll only be relatively small in number. But I think to get yourself a rental increase now, you've got to have yourself a pretty special property. I'll just put that on the back burner. Any plan you had to increase your rents by 8% over the next 2 years, you wouldn't want to be out there as somebody pointing out you've just done that. I'd put it on the back burner for now. Yeah, in the interest of our society overall, just give it a rest for a while.
Fair enough. And we've had a couple of questions about commercial property. So as an investment, and how the banks are looking at them, I guess, as well.
As an asset class,
Yeah. Okie dokie. Okay, so commercial property. Over the past year to 18 months, I've had an increasing number of smaller investors say to me, residential is too hard. I'm going to invest in commercial property because that's easy. And I would try not to laugh, because having seen so many cycles, I know that there's actually a greater sort of reusability of a housing asset in terms of getting in a new tenant than it can be for commercial property, which we all know, even if you're talking about a major city and not just, a smaller town out there, can sit empty for a long period of time. And of course, there's the earthquake vulnerabilities, the ratings that we've seen, getting reassessed over the past few years as well. So although we've seen a lot of people go into commercial property here and overseas, all around the world in these past 10 years, we've already seen retail centres, not shopping malls, the strips in the country sort of emptying out. Well, you're going to see more of that in the near future. These shops can't even open under level 3, for instance. So you are going to see a lot more empty shops. What it does mean, however, if you are well capitalised, you look for where the population growth is expected to occur over the longer term. You look where the infrastructure is going. So more people are going to be looking to live, let's say, up Kapiti Coast, with Transmission Gully being completed. So if I were to see, say, the commercial property market being freed up, a few people, having to sell up in the ways of Levin or Otaki, Waikanae, Paraparaumu, etc., I'd be inclined as an investor to look at those locations because of the infrastructure and the population growth change. So I already know there are quite a number of commercial property investors. They expect to make the purchases of a lifetime over the next 12 months because they'll have the funding, which the banks are probably not going to advance. The banks, if they undertake a loan for commercial property, they have to hold a lot more capital than if they're doing a loan on a residential property. And that capital is expensive. They've got, basically not so much is it around to use as they thought. So the availability of finance will limit debt-funded purchases and investments in commercial property. It's going to be the well-capitalized investors and groups of people getting together. property syndication, I think, will continue, and probably still with a focus maybe on the rural servicing side, because the farming sector, it's got an improved outlook, lower interest rates, better labour force availability, lower exchange rates slightly, greater food demand eventually overseas as well. So I'd have no hesitation in actually, personally, increasing my willingness to look at heavily rural dominated locations around the country. Offices, CBDs, we're all changing the way we work. Zoom, Google Hangouts, whatever the other one is, they're all working really, really well. And so there's going to be more working from home. So I'd say there's probably a few scared investors with some of their CBD assets at the moment.
Yeah. So we've had a couple of people asking questions about, about putting property on the market now or waiting. I know we have an opinion on that. What's yours?
I was just going to say, it's your opinion that matters here. Yeah, I'm not the trader in the market, so no, I'm gonna pass on.
Ignore that one. Good on you.
Well, and I guess from our perspective, what we're seeing, as we said at the beginning of this webinar, is that there are lots of buyers out there. There's lots of buyers that need to buy, and they're looking for property right now for family homes and first homes. So I guess our opinion on it is go to the market as soon as we can, obviously, get out of lockdown. It'll be different. We won't be doing open homes, but we will be able to do private viewings and things like that. So.
Oh, okay. You're going to be able to do private viewings under level 3.
It sounds that way.
It sounds that that's, yeah.
But if you saw Jacinda today, you'll know that she hasn't actually confirmed any dates or anything yet. It's all still, I think obviously they're going to wait and see. If there's no uplift in the number of new cases, then but they're not going to say anything until they're sure in another week or so.
Yeah, and I imagine they want to be 100% certain of their track and tracing, so the contact tracing, etc. I mean, if they bring out an app, your Bluetooth connectivity with other cell phones, I'll sign up for it, no problem.
Absolutely.
And as soon as the world's vaccinated, then I'll delete it off my phone. Okay, I won't mind being tracked for the next wee while. But anyway, that's off to the side.
Yeah, it's cool. I guess, and I had a question come through from a friend of ours earlier. She was interested from a travel perspective, not for herself, in terms of after 9/11, people kind of started traveling again reasonably quickly. Do you see that happening? I mean, sounds like it's not going to be that much in 2020, but 2021, do you think? And I guess they're also, they're looking at it from the perspective that Auckland Airport is doing a whole lot of capital raising at the moment. I mean, where do you see that? Do you have an opinion on it?
Yeah, no, you're right about post the GFC and GFC and 9/11. Yeah, despite all the indignities of going through airport security, etc., we just flooded onto the airplanes and we went overseas holeless bowless. This is relevant for younger people at the moment. They've had 4 weeks of not spending. Look how much they will have saved, and maybe for the next 4 weeks of not spending as well, it'll help offset their KiwiSaver losses. And if they're not traveling once or twice a year to the GC, Bali, Fiji, or whatever, or Hawaii, they'll be able to build themselves up a far better house deposit in the next wee while, just as an aside, with that absence of so much spending. But yeah, I would not expect our borders are going to be opening up to a single international traveller until the planet is vaccinated, or at least until we're all vaccinated, and then the poxy ones can come in if they want. But until that happens, those borders are going to stay closed, and 99% of us would want them to stay closed as well. But what happens after that, the speed with which it returns, I don't have a feel. I'm going to assume it'll be relatively gradual, because people will have been shocked around the world by it all, especially if they're still grappling with outbreaks. Well, hopefully we're not. I'm going to go for the low, slow recovery scenario, starting from second half of 2021.
Yeah, okay. And just one last one. Has your opinion changed on what you think is going to, like, from when we first kind of went into lockdown to now? Has it travelled at all? Changed?
Has it travelled? I guess my opinion is settled down in that I can sleep at nights now. I'm not waking up at 3 or 4 in the morning with new ideas and new ways of interpreting what's happening and new ways of explaining it to people. I never thought, obviously that this would happen. I've been busier in terms of outputs like this one, but mainly in terms of the brain activity than ever before in my entire life, because it's such a unique event. And I got into economics because of my father's business, unfortunately, going under in the housing collapse of the 1970s. And mum got depressed and she went to the doctor, and she's obviously said, I'm depressed, give me the drugs. And apparently when I asked mum about this back then in the 70s, she said, he didn't give me the drugs, he told me to go and read this bloody book. And I said, oh, what was the book, mum? And she said, oh, it's The Grapes of Wrath, about from John Steinbeck. And I said, what's that about? And she said, oh, the Great Depression. And I said, what's that? And she said, go find out. And so I read about the Great Depression, a failure of economics around the world. And in fact, I was even going to reference my go-to book on the Great Depression for the New Zealand version is The Sugar Bag Years by Tony Simpson. It's an oral history, recorded oral history of people's experience. And I was just going to mention it in the context of not everybody suffers badly during a recession, in that a number of people back then who were still doing fine, but everyone around them was not doing fine, they would deliberately cut back their spending. They would deliberately take the tires off their cars and put them on blocks, because it was a pretty bad look to be, looking flash when everybody else was a bit sad. We're not going to get sort of dynamic this time around, but just to reinforce, it's not surprising you are seeing buyers at the moment, because for many people out there, this isn't a positive event, but it's not the big negative for your typical lowly skilled worker, etc. out there. And we know where the burden is going to fall. It's going to be at the lower end of the socio-economic spectrum, the people with the least connectivity with the workforce, the lowest level of skills, etc. So, that's where it goes.
Yeah. Well, I guess we've kind of run out of time here. We've got a bunch of other questions, but we better let you go.
Okay, look, that's fine. Hey, we can do it again another time. If anybody does want to send me a question, I've got a website there, tonyalexander.nz, and you can sign up to my weekly publication there. And also I've been putting out a series of COVID-19 supplements, nothing to do with vitamins, looking at particular aspects of it. The one I sent out earlier this week was a survey of bankers to see what the bankers are doing through all this. The week before was a survey of real estate agents to see what they're seeing in the market. And the next one on Monday, the special thing will be people who have been through recessions. How did they successfully get through? What did they learn? What did they do that worked? What did they do that didn't work and they didn't wish they'd done it? I'm going to be assessing about 70 replies in that regard all over the weekend, and hopefully get that out on Monday morning or Tuesday morning. So you can sign up there at tonyalexander.nz, and I think my email address is there. So if you've got a burning question, send it through, and I might pop it out in the weekly production, the weekly newsletter as well. So thanks very much for having me on, you two.
A pleasure. Thank you, Tony. And if anyone can't remember Tony's email or web address, just drop us a line and we'll be very happy to pass that on. It's really interesting stuff. And thank you very much, Tony. That was fantastic.
Thanks,
Great.
Tony.
Thanks very much.
Appreciate your time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody. And we're still going. Thanks.